The morning was supposed to be quiet. I was sitting on the edge of my small cabin dock, sipping coffee, when the sound of car doors slamming and heavy boots crunching on gravel broke the calm. Within minutes, 2 police officers walked toward me, followed closely by members of the HOA board. Their faces were stern, voices clipped, and before I could even greet them, they told me I was trespassing on their property and had to leave immediately. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. This cabin had been in my family for years, passed down from my grandfather, and I'd grown up spending every summer here. The dock, the trail that wound through the trees, even the little clearing where the wildflowers bloomed, these were the places I knew by heart. But the HOA insisted the land wasn't mine. They said they had records proving I was on their property, and the police were here to enforce it. As they spoke, something felt off. The way they avoided answering my questions, the nervous glances. Between board members, the rushed demands to pack up and leave. Instead of arguing, I quietly went back inside and pulled out the original documents my grandfather left me. What I found not only proved them wrong, but revealed something they clearly didn't want me to know. It turned out, didn't just own the cabin, and the Dakai owned the land beneath their parking lot, the trail they all used, and even part of the lake access they'd been claiming for years. Standing there, with the cops waiting for my answer, I realized this wasn't just about me being evicted. It was about to flip the entire HOA's world upside down. I could still hear the faint hum of the police radios as I walked back to Ward, the dock documents clutched tightly in my hand. My grandfather had always been quiet about the property, saying only that someday you'll understand why this place matters. At the time, I thought he meant the memories, the peace of the lake, but as I looked over the old survey maps and handwritten notes, I realized he had left me something much bigger than I ever imagined. The trail the HOA claimed as their own wasn't just a path to the water. It was the original access route, too. The entire lakeside community, recorded decades ago before the neighborhood even existed. The parking lot they built stayed squarely on my family's deeded land. Somehow, over the years, that information had been buried, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose. When I stepped back outside, the HOA president was pacing near the officers, phone in hand, talking fast and low. The others whispered to each other. Avoiding eye contact, it struck me how desperate they seemed, like they knew something was about to unravel. I didn't say anything yet. Instead, I took in every detail: the nervous tapping of the HOA treasurer's foot, the way one officer subtly glanced at the documents I held, the silence that followed whenever I moved closer. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It felt like they were hiding something, and the strangest part? The property line markers I found on the map didn't match what was visible on the ground. Some boundaries had been shifted, fences added in places they never should have been. The question wasn't just why they were trying to evict MIT, was how long they'd been pretending this land was theirs at all. The argument started quietly, almost under their breath, but soon it grew sharp enough for everyone to hear. The HOA president kept insisting they had new paperwork proving the cabin and dock fell under their jurisdiction. The police officers stayed neutral, saying they were only there to keep the peace. But I could tell even they were unsure about what was happening. Every time I mentioned my deed, the board members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other as if they were worried I knew something they didn't want to come out. As the tension rose, I couldn't stop wondering why they were fighting so hard for this land. The trail was small, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, and the parking lot was just gravel and faded lines. It didn't make sense unless there was something about this property I hadn't uncovered yet. My grandfather's notes hinted at easements and rights of way, but there were also cryptic remarks about hidden value beneath the soil. Meanwhile, neighbors started gathering at the edge of the dock. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few whispered to the board members like they were hiding a secret of their own. One older man even muttered that this wasn't the first time the HOA had pulled something like this. That caught my attention. The subplots began to tangle together, the sudden rush to evict me, the missing property markers, and the strange way everyone seemed invested in the outcome. It was no longer about just a dock or a trail. Something bigger was buried here, both literally and figuratively. And judging by the looks I was getting, I wasn't the only one who knew it was about to come to light. The wind off the lake picked up, scattering dry leaves across the dock as the crowd grew silent. All eyes were on me, the lone figure holding weathered documents that could overturn everything they believed about this land. My heart pounded so loudly, I swore they could hear it. The HOA president's face flushed red, her voice tight as she demanded the officers remove me before this gets worse. But even the police hesitated now. Glancing at the old maps I had laid out on the dock, I pointed to the boundaries clearly marked decades earlier. The lines that showed not only my cabin and dock, but the trail and parking lot everyone used. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by a single whisper from one of the neighbors. "He's right." That single phrase changed the air. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, people pulling out their phones, taking photos, filming everything. The HOA members huddled together, panic flashing in their eyes. Then something strange happened. The officers quietly asked the president why, if their claim was so solid. The HOA's own paperwork was dated years after my grandfather's deed. Her response wasn't defensive, it was evasive. She mumbled about updated filings and community interests, never actually answering the question. In that moment, I realized this was bigger than property lines. Someone had altered records. Someone had been profiting off land they didn't own. And now, with the truth spilling out in front of the entire community, they were desperate to keep control. The officer's hand hovered near his radio as more neighbors closed in, demanding answers. I could feel the climax building. Everything about this confrontation was about to explode. And I was standing in the center of it. Before anyone could speak, an unfamiliar voice cut through the tense silence. A tall man stepped out from the tree line, carrying a worn leather briefcase. His clothes were dusty, like he had been walking for miles, but his expression was almost calm. Without addressing anyone directly, he announced he was a representative of a private developer and had paperwork proving they now owned the disputed land, including my cabin, dock, and even part of the lake itself. The crowd erupted. Neighbors shouted questions. The HOA president looked stunned, and the police stepped forward, unsure who to believe anymore. My mind spun. A developer. No one had mentioned this before. The man opened his briefcase and pulled out glossy blueprints showing luxury condos, planned for the shoreline, the same spot where my grandfather's cabin stood. But here's where it got stranger. The blueprints were dated months before the HOA even tried to evict me. It wasn't about property lines. This entire confrontation had been part of something bigger, clearing me out so the developer could move in quietly. As I scanned the documents, my eyes caught a familiar signature at the bottom of the page. It was one I'd seen before on an old letter my grandfather wrote, warning about outsiders trying to claim what isn't theirs. The connection hit me hard. My family had fought this battle decades ago, and somehow it was happening again, only with higher stakes. This wasn't just about keeping a dock or a trail. Anymore, it was about stopping a plan that could erase everything tied to my family's history. And judging by the way the developer smiled, confident and unshaken, I knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. The moment felt like it would split the air in two. The developer stood there, calm and collected, while the HOA board scrambled to explain themselves. I laid my grandfather's deed on the hood of a police cruiser, side by side with the developer's glossy blueprints. The officers examined both, their radios crackling as they called dispatch to verify records. The crowd waited in tense silence, neighbors whispering about how far this fight had gone when the confirmation came through. It silenced everyone. The original deed was still valid, and the land had never been sold to the HOA or any developer. Everything from the cabin to the trail, even the parking lot, was mine. The HOA president went pale. The other board members backing away as neighbors demanded answers about the years of false claims and fees they'd collected. But before I could even take in the relief, the developer stepped forward again. He didn't look defeated. Instead, he pulled out one last document, an easement signed decades ago by my grandfather, granting limited access to a buried water line. On the map, that line ran directly under the cabin. That's when it clicked. The developer hadn't been after the land for condos. They were after something beneath it. The officers stepped in, saying this new claim would have to go through court, but I could see it in the developer's eyes. This wasn't over. The cabin was safe for now. The truth was out, and the HOA's grip was broken. But something far older, Barry,